So today, we're going to take a deep dive into some of the elements of Governor Murphy's proposed budget, which he released on February 25th. Here are some of the highlights. The proposed budget is $58.1 billion, an increase of $1.4 billion, or about 2.7%. And that's an increase over the current fiscal year budget that was signed into law in June 2024. All in all, about 44% of the budget is going to school and municipal aid, with $12.1 billion for K-12 schools and $1.3 billion for pre-K schools. There's also $4.3 billion in direct property tax relief to individual homeowners and renters, $1.5 billion is budgeted for New Jersey payments. Health benefit payments for active and retired state employees is at $6.7 billion. There are, unfortunately, $1.2 billion in proposed new fees and taxes, including tax increases for realty transfers, sports betting, alcohol, adult use, marijuana, cigarettes, and a host of other things. There's also a $6.3 billion allocated as a surplus, and all of this leaves a structural deficit of about $1.2 billion. So let me welcome today's panelists who are going to give us their insights on the budget. We had them last year, and I think those of you who saw that would agree that they did a great job. So I'm joined by Dale Florio, Princeton Public Affairs Group. Dale is considered one of the top lobbyists in New Jersey and has worked on behalf of the NJCPA for years. Welcome, Dale.
Thank you, Jeff.
And we are also happy to have once again Chris Emigholz, Chief Government Affairs Officer at the New Jersey Business and Industry Association. He covers taxation, budget, and economic development. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
So let's start with the overall impression of the proposed budget. We recently surveyed NJCPA members about the budget, and 80% said that it would make the economy worse over the long term. 9% said the economy will stay the same, and only 11% felt it would improve the economy. So before we turn to Chris and Dale, I'll give my thumbnail impression. So based on what the administration was telling the press, I was expecting to see a budget with significant cuts. However, as far as I can tell, this budget is essentially the same as last year's budget, but with an additional $1.2 billion in taxes. Last year's signed budget had a structural deficit of $2.2 billion. This year, the deficit will be $1.2 billion, which is better, except that, as far as I can tell, it was achieved by the hike in taxes. So without the new taxes, I think the gap would be approximately the same. So I'm disappointed that we didn't get the cuts and changes we were led to believe there would be. In my personal opinion, what we got was just more of the same, but with another $1.2 billion in added taxes. So that's my 2 cents. Now on to the experts. Chris, what is your overall impression of the budget?
Jeff, first off, I agree strongly with a lot of the research that comes and the data comes from the Society of CPAs. And so I think your members know what's going on. They have a good pulse on our economy. And so them being as troubled with the budget, I think says a lot. You said this word in your opening, and that's disappointing. I think there's positives in this budget, but I was expecting more. And I think you kind of led us on with some of those things that there were high hopes that, hey, is the governor going to be a little more fiscally responsible and try to cut our spending levels, make it more sustainable? Is there going to be obviously last year, we were very concerned about a $1 billion tax on the business community, directly on the biggest job creators in the state. We weren't thinking we'd go there again, but I didn't expect to see another $1 billion plus tax increase proposed. I don't think a lot of people did. Right. And this is the governor that campaigned 4 years ago. And after he won the election said, I don't see any need for new taxes in my second term. Obviously, we saw a big one last year with the highest corporate tax rate in the nation. And then we see a lot more taxes again this year.
Yeah. So Dale, what's your impression?
God bless the next governor.
You mean may God bless the
Well, the next governor is going to need
all the God he
the
can
higher
get.
ups, right? All the God he can get,
Or she.
For sure. So you have that situation where the cupboard essentially is on automatic to go bare. You can't keep
Right.
spending and using surplus, although we talk about $6+ billion in surplus, but we're not refilling the surplus like we once were.
Right.
So it's going away. The other question mark here is obviously our budget has to be done by July 1st. The other question mark is what are the feds going to do?
Oh, yeah.
The federal government, Congress has pushed back the conversation about a budget, especially in the Medicaid area. And I know we'll probably talk more about that, but that Medicaid discussion won't be settled until probably September, October.
Wow.
So what we pass as a budget in the end of June may have to be pulled back. We may see the legislature having to come back into session, depending on the level of Medicaid cuts.
Wow.
So what you see, you may not see by the end of the year.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the last time that's happened where we've
No.
had to come back and redo.
It's a real roller coaster. So in his address, the governor praised the proposal's fiscal soundness. So let's watch a clip from his budget address about this.
One of my single highest priorities as governor has been restoring trust in Trenton's leadership. And with every budget we have proposed, we have sought to make smart and prudent decisions today so our taxpayers feel more economically secure tomorrow and in the decades to come. And our budget proposal for the next fiscal year is no different. Thanks to the leadership of Treasurer Liz Moyo and her entire team, we have crafted a proposal that meets all of our sacred obligations to the people of New Jersey, from providing record high property tax relief to fully funding our public education system. But at the same time, we're also demonstrating restraint when it comes to spending taxpayer dollars. In fact, our budget will largely cap all new discretionary spending. In that same spirit, I'm also proud to report that our budget will include a more than $6.3 billion surplus, which will help guard us against unforeseen challenges, including the uncertainty that has swept over Washington. I think it's safe to say that we are facing more uncertainty at the federal level than at any other point in modern history. And this uncertainty has a direct impact on all of us, and most importantly, the people of New Jersey. We cannot negotiate a budget in a bubble. And while I sincerely hope that the situation in Washington settles down and that we, in turn, have a normal, healthy budget season over the next few months, that is by no means a guarantee. There is a distinct possibility that we will instead need to pursue a break-the-glass strategy.
So, Chris, what are your thoughts? Is this a fiscally responsible budget like the governor says?
Well, Jeff, I always try to be balanced, present both sides. And I think Governor Murphy does deserve some credit for paying the full pension payment now for the 5th year in a row. That's something that we had governors of both parties struggle with. And Governor Christie kind of put us on the path to eventually get there. Started, and thankfully Governor Murphy's kept that path, even accelerated that path, and kept it there. And it's very easy to say, hey, we can just kick the can down the road a little bit and spend this money to avoid maybe some of the cuts or some of the tax increases. But he didn't. Pension payments are important because we got to fix our fiscal ship of the state. Right. And if we don't get the pension payment, we don't do that. I think getting school aid payment to 100% of the formula, I think building up a healthier surplus. Now, again, some of that, the surplus, he was helped out by the COVID largesse of the federal government. He was helped out by the overly stimulated economy leading to greater tax revenues. He was helped out by the bonding that the administration did that didn't need to happen. But still, it put that into surplus instead of just spending it all. So I think the pensions, I think school aid, I think surplus, you see some movement. But I also think the glaring thing that I see is that the deficit spending. This administration has continued a structural deficit. Last year in your opening, you talked about it being over $2 billion. Now it's over $1 billion. It's a little smaller, But the fact that you still have this, you're spending $1 billion more than what you're bringing in revenue. That's the definition of not sustainable. And
Right.
to Dale's point, we're
What's he
giving that to the
talking
next
about?
governor. And so I don't think you can say that it's a responsible budget if you have a deficit.
Yeah, well, I was wondering where that was coming from in the speech. But so Dale, what do you think? Fiscally responsible?
Listen, I agree with Chris in terms of the pension payment and the school funding formula. And I think Chris would agree. We need a new funding formula, right? Our existing
Right.
formula goes back to 2008. The land has shifted, populations have shifted within school districts. We need a new funding formula. Right now, the one we have is really not fair. I mean,
Right.
the suburban school districts are really bearing an unfair burden here. The problem we have here is you can't go from a $38 billion budget under Chris Christie, his last budget, and approach $58+ billion. All of that money, that was all started by the COVID largesse and unexpected higher revenues from the major taxes. So rather than managing government, a lot of that money was put into what we would call Christmas tree items, right? Things that weren't sustainable. How much infrastructure did we do? We're still complaining about New Jersey Transit, right? When you have that kind of money and that type of available revenue, you want to put it into projects that are going to last a long time. It's not fair to give hope to nonprofit organizations that may be depending on this for their operating dollars, and then you're going to run into a next year or the year after, and they're going to be still coming back to state government for the money. So the social programs probably have grown too quickly. We haven't probably put enough money into infrastructure, right? And the next couple of years, we're going to pay the price for it.
Yeah, we're going to be back to the good old-fashioned government.
Good old bad old days.
So Chris, as you mentioned, there's a structural gap of $1.2 billion in this budget. What could be removed, in your opinion, from the budget or be done differently to bring that down? And then separately, what is this $1.4 billion in supplemental spending for this fiscal year? So let's take the first part.
So
What could be
and the
done
governor
different?
asked this in his budget speech, and he talked to the critics, and the NJBIA was one of them, and he's like, to the critics that say we spend too much, what would you cut? Was I think what the governor exactly said, and it's a good question because it's not easy, and
Right.
we've seen Governor Christie, Governor Corzine, Governor McGreevey all wrestle with this. There's a lot of stuff in our budget that's kind of baked in and hard to cut. Who's going to say that we should cut Medicaid spending, debt service, healthcare, salaries for employees, money that goes out the door for school aid and pensions and property tax relief? Those are all important, but I think Dale raised the most important piece that has been neglected is that excess spending. If you're spending per formula and it's helping New Jerseyans, if you're spending in a way that's stimulating the economy through infrastructure, building stuff, we haven't built enough stuff. If you're actually spending in a way that's educating the future workforce, developing workforce development, that's great. If you're spending in a way that's getting the innovation economy going, that's great. Stimulate the economy. I don't see evidence of a lot of that in broad patterns. I see a lot of the Christmas trees, the pork, as they say in some circles. And one stat that I was looking at, if you look at the past 15 budgets, the majority of the Murphy budgets grew significantly from the governor's budget message, the last Tuesday of February, to the budget signed. I believe the growth is $5.5 billion cumulatively over the 7 Murphy budgets that have been signed now, from what was proposed to what was signed. And usually, folks have been following budget for a while. We don't see these brand new programs. Okay, now we're going to fund schools or fund pension. Like all the meat and potatoes of the budget is done in the budget message. The stuff that's added after, now some of it's important. Some of it you can argue was, hey, they made a change to school funding or they changed to property tax relief programs. We could debate that. But a lot of that extra spending is extra and excess and not necessary. And so just think, what if we had $5.5 billion back today? Revenues were the exact same. Nothing was changed. But all of a sudden, that $6.3 billion surplus, which the governor's taking credit for, now it was $11.8 billion surplus.
Yeah.
Imagine that position we'd be in and we wouldn't have needed maybe the tax increase last year to make us the highest corporate tax rate in the nation. We wouldn't need the 1.2 billion on this year. So just think about if the governor, it's hard to say what you cut now, but to that governor's question, why don't we just say no last year and 2 years ago and 3 years ago and 4 years ago?
Yeah.
We would have $5.5 billion.
Well, more if the original proposals weren't so big either. So the second half of that question, tell me what this supplemental spending thing is all about.
So every year, and we've all had budgets, Society of CPAs, PPAG, NJCPA, or households, you have a budget, you plan that budget, you work that budget, but things come up. And maybe your roof has a leak, your bathroom needs to be replaced in some way, whatever it is, but there's things that come up and adjustments get made. So state budget's no different. So the governor's proposals made, the legislature sends a budget to them, it's signed, it becomes law the end of June. Now we're 6, 7, 8 months into that budget and things are adjusted. Some of those adjustments are, hey, we didn't need to spend as much here or there. And that's kind of found money that you can roll back into the budget. And some of it becomes stuff you roll into the budget this year. Or you realize, hey, wait, there was more of an issue here or there and we had to spend more money. So overall, those turn into, and this is getting into the weeds in budgeting, but you look at the budget line items overall, there's like appropriations, which is that $58.1 billion number. There's revenues, which is $1.2 billion less than an appropriation number. And then there's resources. We do have a balanced budget because our resources, because of all the stuff rolled over from previous years, some of those, we used to call it one-stop, non-recurring. Sometimes they call it one-stop gimmicks, one-time gimmicks. But all of that money got rolled into this budget, which helped get us the surplus and helped balance the budget. So you could have a balanced budget with that deficit we've been talking about at the same time. So that supplemental spending, that's what it is. Maybe you had a storm somewhere. Maybe you had a pothole on a highway that people didn't think about. And so you had to do extra this, extra that. That's where that new spending comes from.
Okay. So, and if I followed you right, that 1 point whatever supplemental spending is actually over what was originally proposed and came from, I think you once called it found money, or in other words, if we didn't have that money laying around, we would have been in a lot of trouble.
Every agency in state government submits line items and numbers, but I would challenge anybody to say that a lot of those line items are padded. In other words, they know that they're not going to spend all of that money.
Okay.
So then at the right time, that money is drawn down and used for other purposes.
Okay.
So a lot of, and I don't blame agency officials. They want to keep the money. So they year after year ask for the same amount of money or a little bit more, knowing that maybe they're going to spend less, but maybe in the next year, they're going to spend more. Yeah. So but fair there enough. Is money throughout. You just have to know where it is.
That's what you guys are for. So we have a question from the audience. What this question is where are we with reining in the public employee benefit package, including retirement and health? So let's start with you, Chris, since you are in the weeds with the budget. What's the story?
I think this does add to the disappointment I said at the beginning, and also is part of where would you cut, but obviously you're not going to be able to cut any pension benefit and materialize savings today. That's more of a long-term budget liabilities if you address these long-term liabilities for future employees. So I am disappointed that we had at the end of the Christie administration, Governor Christie working with the Path to Progress work group that was created under Senate President Sweeney, Senator Sarlo, Senator Oroho, bipartisan group that tried to send the legislature and governor ideas to rein in the cost of state government. And I think there was potential there. That potential has been unrealized. And my disappointment is over the past 7 years, we haven't heard much talk about that. And by no means does NJBIA or even the Path to Progress group endorse cutting the current benefits of current state workers that are doing great jobs, doing important work throughout public government. But we need to talk about, hey, can the future public employee not have quite as rich of a health plan or pension plan? And will that save money so that we don't have to put quite as much into the pension fund for that person retiring in 20, 30, 40 years? I think the answer is yes. And I think we've missed an opportunity there to do something with that.
The other thing I would just add to that is that coming out of the pandemic, costs remain low, but now the companies, the insurers are now, the experience always lags in terms of what drives their premiums. So the cost now is really, the last 2 or 3 years is really hit the pension plan.
10% or.
In fact, there was an announcement yesterday that came out that said that they were going to have to put more money into the system. So it's just now all starting to hit. I mean, as a small business operator, we're seeing our premiums go up the last 2 years because it's post-COVID. It's just starting to hit.
Right. I remember, what was it, the 90s when they were going up like 20% a year.
Right. Yeah, we were in single digits for a little bit, but
back to.
Yeah. You know, I think people were seeing inflation when they went out to a restaurant or went to the grocery store years back. But I think now we're seeing inflation's catching up, whether it's small business budgets, the insurance and energy bills you're getting in the mail and seeing those go up, or you're seeing even like school district budgets, municipal budgets, that inflation's catching up and now they're not able to offer as many services, or they have to increase taxes more than they want.
Right. So here's another question. Are New Jersey's tax revenues coming in as expected, including the new and increased tax items? So let's go with you, our budget guru, again. You can get us
well, I think the answer is they're coming in strong. And talking about the new and increased tax items, that probably references the corporate tax that went up last year by $1 billion. And obviously, we were terribly disappointed with that. We fought hard to try to stop that or ameliorate it in some way. It went through. We now have this 11.5% rate, the highest in the nation. The one positive that we saw about this is that we believe investing in infrastructure is good, and we were happy the governor kept his promise of that increase in taxes is going to support NJ Transit. And I have a lot of faith in the new director of NJ Transit and spending that money maybe in a better way than has been spent recently. I wish they didn't have that money at all, but if they have it, go to NJ Transit and support our infrastructure, transportation, the way it should.
Right. Another technical question for you, Chris. How much of the budget is discretionary? In other words, programs not needed to operate the state?
Well, there's no right or wrong answer to that, because it's a very much eye of the beholder kind of thing. Right. And so we had previous governors where the pension payment was a discretionary thing. And some of the governors, before Governor Christie started us on this path and Governor Murphy's kept us on this path, a lot of governors just, okay, the pension payment should be this, and they ignored that and they put in what they wanted to. And I think that was a mistake, treating that as discretionary. So I would, again, say things like debt service, I don't think anybody's thinking about not paying that, or paying for health insurance premiums for our current state employees, salaries for current state employees. There's things like that no one's ever contemplated not doing. But even, I say state employee salaries, well, there were years where there were furloughs. There were years where people looked at alternative ways to try to find money. So it is hard to say that nothing is not discretionary. Right. But I do think, and you talked about it at the beginning, the vast majority, maybe it's better to say how much money goes out the door that the state actually is not controlling and seeing their budget of what the individual departments are spending. But if the school aid's out the door, how much ability does the state have throughout the year to adjust that? Pension payment, it's going into the pension fund. How much ability does the state have to control that? So I would say a significant amount of the state budget is not easy to control. Right. In crises, we've seen some adjustments, and hopefully we never get there, because, again, to right that fiscal ship of the state, we want to be making sure our statutory requirements we're meeting.
Right. The percentage that's bantered about all the time, it's anywhere between 70 and 80% they say is non-discretionary. In other words, you got to do it. I would tell you that unless something is constitutionally dedicated, in other words, unless the tax is constitutionally dedicated, or there's a contractual obligation, like and there are statutes, but as we've seen at the federal level, and governors too can ignore statutes. They do it all the time in terms of the spending of money. So constitutionally dedicated or contractual, as Chris said, discretion is in the eye of the beholder in terms of what you call discretionary.
Right. Interesting. I never thought of it like that. So, Chris, while there has been aid to small businesses in Governor Murphy's past budgets, I seem to recall, even during COVID, when the billions were coming in, that it was always much less than what businesses were seeking. What about this budget? Is it any better this time?
I think that word disappointment that I use can be characterized here again. You talked about being disappointed that there had the potential of being more cuts, real cuts, to make the budget more sustainable. We didn't see that, but what we did see a lot of cuts is in our economic development programs. And unfortunately, the Main Street program, the manufacturing extension program, the manufacturing voucher program, the commissions for science, innovation, technology, a lot of programs that actually are stimulating the economy, they got cut.
Right.
And then the other large area that I saw cuts that were disproportionate compared to other things in the budget is higher ed. And again, higher ed, they're the guys who are innovating. They're the guys that are training the future workforce, good for the economy. And we saw a lot of cuts across the board in higher ed. I'll just bring up the $20 million cut, it's an operating aid cut to our county colleges. They do great work. They are actually the definition of helping the kind of stronger, fairer kind of way to approach things of lifting up the first-time college goers, the lower income folks who county college might be the only option to stay in their neighborhood going to a college. And those are the folks that are going to be hurt by this. And by the way, they're also doing the lion's share of workforce development in the state and hosting other higher ed providers in workforce development. And we want to make sure that we have a strong county college sector that's doing the workforce development we all want and need. And I worry that these cuts to them and all higher ed might hurt that, especially just the manufacturing point, just to double back to that a little bit. I almost see a schizophrenic budgeting in some ways. So the governor talked up this new manufacturing tax credit, which sounds fantastic. And VA would love to see the details and is going to be happy to support that when we do see them. And manufacturing is important, the multiplier effect to our economy, the way it stimulates other things, great. So let's support it. But we're going to do a new tax credit, but yeah, we're also then going to cut a voucher program that helped them invest in their own equipment and a program that support the manufacturing extension program that does great work. I was like, well, do we care about manufacturing or not?
Right.
Let's go all in or let's not do that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing we haven't talked about yet, and I know we still have another half hour to go, but the politics of all this situation. Nobody believes, if you walk the halls of Trenton, that higher ed is going to sustain the level of cuts that they've sustained. Oh, so it's going to get put back in. What happens to the budget? Are they going to cut something somewhere else? So, there's the politics of all the things we've been talking about here. And what you see is not necessarily what you're going to get at the end of the day. So, I mean, I couldn't agree with Chris more in terms of the negative impact to higher ed, especially the community colleges.
Yeah.
But they've been enforced last week in Trenton, really working hard. So the money's going to come back. Which is going to get added on. We should do another show in 2 weeks because you're going to want to update this program.
All right, guys. Well, then you come back. All right.
Weekly regulars.
Yes, and we'll get into more of the politics later on. So in his address, the governor mentions tax relief several times. So let's watch a clip.
Right now, the single biggest challenge facing the people of New Jersey is that the cost of living is way too high. And given the global economic disruptions, especially inflation, that have battered the American people over the past few years, it's really no wonder that our working neighbors feel as if they've been forgotten by those of us in power. So to every New Jerseyan who shares these concerns, here is my message to you. Our administration is going to spend every minute we have left fighting for you. And with our budget proposal, our administration will continue delivering economic security and opportunity to every New Jerseyan by providing yet another round of record high tax relief.
So, Chris, Dale, what's he referring to? There are $1.2 billion in new taxes and fees. Am I missing something? Are there substantial cuts that I'm not noticing, Chris?
There are some tax cuts proposed by the governor that I think would make a difference to stimulate the economy, especially on the innovation side. I referenced the manufacturing proposal that the governor made. Also, Governor Murphy basically endorsed two bills moving in the legislature. One is an angel investor tax credit expansion. We have this program, but he wants to expand it. That's actually passed the Senate. It's moved through an assembly committee. And there's a new bill that's moving now. It's getting in the weeds.
Capital gains,
QSBS, Qualified Small Business Stock.
Not new. We wrote that 8 years ago,
but
Chris.
new that it's moving in the legislature. It's never moved before. But
That's
thankfully,
true.
CPAs, you guys always have the best ideas coming out of your
Right.
members. So it was a CPA idea, and BIA and Tech United, which is kind of like the Technology Association, are all supporting this because it's a way to support our entrepreneurs, startups in this area to kind of get more capital. And a lot of times these businesses starting out, they need help. And our state is a little bit less
Generous.
we're not doing as much as other states are on this. So we're basically bringing our QSBS treatment in line with other states, which is a good thing for innovation economy in New Jersey. So we see those three, I would say, pro-manufacturing, pro-innovation, pro-startup things. And we also see this idea of we're dramatically increasing the sales tax on a bunch of items you referenced, Jeff, but we're planning to cut it on baby products and sunscreen. Again, positive thing.
Right.
Politics. It's all
Right.
A little bit of politics, yes.
It's not much money either. What is that? 10
Yeah, I don't
million?
think that's as stimulative, not a bad idea, but
Yeah.
not as stimulative to the economy. The other three ideas could be stimulating job creation and
Right.
and things we'd be
Right.
happy to support.
The definition of property tax relief is so broad. I mean, it's kind of like living, in South Brunswick, but saying you have a Princeton address. I mean, it's like covers all of Central Jersey. So that's where governors, I mean, this governor is no different, but all governors talk about the amount of property tax relief that's given. But it could be any number of things that they want to say that you're getting back.
Right.
In addition to all the various rebate programs that we have. I mean, one of the ghosts in the room is the speaker's program.
NJ Stay
New Jersey.
Stay New Jersey.
Right? I mean, on top of the anchor program, and there's a price tag to that.
400 million, right, Chris?
It's big. Now, to people that are going to receive that money, we get that.
Right.
There are others that would say that we should just combine all these rebate programs
Yes.
into one, because the participation rate in a lot of these programs is not as high as it could be.
Yes.
People don't know about them, right? So, or we just not have rebate programs, and we put some sort of cap on your property tax bill or something that, right? I mean, but if you're into redistribution of income, the rebate programs work. If you think that we should just cut your property taxes directly and keep the money in your pocket, so there's two schools of thought on how you approach that.
Right. But still, I don't see the cuts that you were talking about are pretty small, right? The tax cuts.
Those taxes will be small compared to the $1.2 billion in new taxes. Right. That sales tax expansion will hit a lot of people hard.
Right.
And I guess is unique compared to some previous proposed increases by the Murphy administration that were more focused on businesses, which were bad and going to hurt the economy.
Right.
But you now have a lot of tax increase. They're going to hit regular families going about their regular jobs and regular days,
Right.
and now they're going to be paying more for things that they never thought they would. So I think the sales tax increase, the realty transfer fee increase, hitting housing. We'll talk about affordable housing, but we're going to tax it more. We know we need to build more of it. We need to sell more of it to get the market moving, to bring down costs, and yet we're going to tax it. Again, that's schizophrenic budgeting. It doesn't seem to fit. And then we see a host of sin taxes on things. Again, we live in a very stressful state, New Jersey. It costs a lot. People are nervous, and maybe they want to have that drink. Maybe they want to now get a gummy at one of the legal stores, and now it's going to cost more, significantly more in some cases. Sports betting and other maybe sin tax. We're significantly increasing the tax, and it's an affordability issue, but it's also a competitive issue. And I think they're two different sides of the coin. And sometimes we focus more on affordability, which we should. That competitiveness, well, maybe that person that works in New York and lives in New Jersey, maybe they're going to make that bet in another state because they can, and that we're losing out on potential revenue. Maybe they're going to hold on to that house a little bit longer, and then that kind of has a chilling effect on the market and continues to see prices go up. And so there's effects here that will kind of filter down everyone.
Right. Any thoughts?
I was going to just add that, the tax increases that Chris talked about do affect a lot of different constituencies. A lot of folks that are at the other end, the lower end of the economic spectrum, a lot of them are considered regressive taxes.
Yeah.
Now, the governor, has also cut a lot of the, quote, Christmas tree items from the last couple of years. I mean, significant amount of money to social services programs and the like. So he's challenged the legislature All right, if you want those back, because right, I mean, legislators, congressmen, they get measured on how much they quote bring back to the district.
Yeah.
Right, so he's challenged them. Support these taxes, and maybe we can bring these programs back. So that's the politics. That's the yin and the yang of all this, which people don't see. We don't have a media that really reports on this like it once was. That'll be the yin and the yang over the next several weeks here as we get into the June period.
Well, that's a new show maybe we can do here. Inside the halls of Trenton. So now let's turn to school funding. Here's a clip of the governor's budget address about that.
And it goes without saying, one of the most important investments we can make into New Jersey's future is supporting our children. That is exactly why our administration has made monumental investments into strengthening our best-in-the-nation public education system. With every budget we have introduced, we have provided record high funding for our K through 12 schools. And with our final budget, we will once again fully fund New Jersey's public education system. And we're also going to reduce volatility in the school funding process by ensuring that no school district sees a steep reduction in state aid from one year to the next. Altogether, our budget will provide the single largest investment into New Jersey's public schools in history.
So, in the budget proposal, K through 12s are fully funded. And back to sort of what you were talking about before, community colleges were cut, I think, 20 million, and four-year schools also. So what's up with this? Is this somehow politically driven, or it seems contrary, especially the community colleges part where the governor has been a strong supporter of that. What's driving these education cuts and higher education cuts? Any thoughts?
The shame about higher ed is, I think, when we think about everything the state funds, higher ed at least has the tuition backstop. And so if the state cuts them, and county colleges theoretically have a second backstop in the counties and the tuition. So yes, our colleges are public, and even private colleges were considerably cut in this budget with some of the aid, which is much, much smaller, but they used to get aid from the state, and it was cut quite a bit. I think it's important to fund all of higher ed, but I think there's a thinking in the state that if we cut them, they have other places to find money, unlike cutting K to 12. And so we often see this dichotomy of K to 12 goes up and up and up, and higher ed is often held flat or even going down in this year's budget. K to 12, they're both just as important, especially in this day and age where higher ed, greater technical skills, workforce development, what K to 12 is doing is just as important as higher ed. But I think sometimes we see that dichotomy, which I think doesn't make sense because we lose a lot of our students that we just invested hundreds of millions of dollars over time on, and they go to another state because they stay there and they realize, go to college there, realize how much more affordable it is, and they don't come back.
Right. So we have a question from our audience, and that is, what are funding levels for non-public schools, such as technology schools, nursing, security, etc.? I'm assuming they're talking about the training programs as opposed to private.
I think this is I apologize, a little more in the weeds than I can do without actually looking at the budget in front of me, the giant document. But no, this is non-public K to 12. So students going to Catholic schools, Orthodox Jewish schools, you name it. The state does subsidize some of that education to a much less extent than public K to 12 schools. But part of that subsidies are the programs you expect: nursing, textbooks, technology. And every year in the budget, I would say the private school, Catholic school, Orthodox Jewish school advocates do a great job advocating for those communities. I have not heard what that level is this year, and so I don't know if it's cut. It's the same. A lot of times it is the same, and you see the advocates come in and argue that because of inflation, as we're talking about, needs to go up, but I don't know any more about that.
I can say on the non-public side that I believe everything has at least stayed the same, although I think there's some issues with the nursing program or the nursing costs that are going to be addressed. But I believe everything is.
So you mean those programs?
No, these aren't nursing programs. As Chris pointed out, these are the Catholic schools, the yeshivas, the Christian schools. They are entitled under our law to similar services, not exact services, but similar services that you would get in a public school.
Okay.
So they do get money to bring in nurses. They do get, they get money for security.
Okay.
They get money for transportation.
Interesting.
Because you pay tuition to go to these schools typically, but it's typically not enough to cover the things that you would necessarily get in a public school. It's not funded at the same level, but they do get money for those purposes.
Okay, I didn't realize that. So Dale, I have a few political questions for you. From a political perspective, do you expect stiff opposition from legislators on the tax hikes? And what other areas do you think there might be some serious contention between the legislature and the governor?
Well, I can say at the outset, Jeff, that 2025 will be a year that certainly I haven't experienced, and I've got a few years,
just a few,
invested in politics and advocacy work for a whole host of reasons. The backdrop of Washington, right? That's a completely new dynamic that nobody's really experienced. Right. Number two, again, probably a weed type thing, but the party line as we knew it has gone away. So counties can endorse, but when primary voters go into the ballot box in June, they're not going to see a line of Democrats or a line of Republicans that kind of guide you that if you're a primary voter in the Democratic primary, you're going to probably vote down that line. Now you're going to have people that are running for a particular office all grouped together. They might have the county endorsement slogan, right? But otherwise, people are just going to, it's going to be slogans. It's just going to be a glob of people for governor.
For each office.
Glob of people for assembly. And you have to be familiar with the county endorsement slogan to really know who is endorsed by the local Democrat. Okay. So that has everybody very, very nervous in the primaries, both Democrats and Republicans. We're seeing more primary elections coming up, okay, which will be a month before the final vote on the budget, right? It'll be June 10th this year. We actually moved it back a week due to a major Jewish holiday. Right. So there are a lot of primaries, and that's why people are very hyper. They're hyper about maybe the cuts in the governor's budget for things that they had worked on for social service organizations or charitable organizations. They're nervous about maybe voting for these tax cuts that the governor's proposed. So it's very confusing out there in this world. So as I sit here today, I don't think we have a clear picture in which way leadership in both houses are going to take this governor's budget.
Really? Okay, interesting. Yep. But I mean, sort of as a political mantra, when you're running for office, you don't want new taxes, especially when they hit a lot of people, right?
You don't, but again, I look at these tax proposals. Right? Gaming, cannabis. Do you want sales tax expansion on your bowling game?
Right.
I mean, you can separate out some of these.
And you just cut them.
Well, you can play them as you want to play them.
Right.
The smokers are going to be upset. The gamblers are going to be upset. There's a line in there about extending the sales tax to digital services. We don't know what that means yet. We're not sure what that means yet.
Might be the most expensive thing in the whole budget.
It could be. We're waiting to see what that means.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So there's a little bit in there for everybody.
A little bit of pain.
And there's also a 40-cent increase on your telephone bill.
Right. Every month, right?
Every month. Well, you pay a 911 fee right now per line. Right. 90 cents per month per line for your for 911, right? Which I don't know if anybody here has used 911, but it's an important thing. This is for 988. So it's an existing mental health line. So if you're having a crisis, you can call 988. Legitimate. Okay.
Right.
I mean, it's, you like to see money go for a particular purpose. There's a connection, obviously, between telephones and getting somebody on the other line.
Yes,
right?
No, that's true.
but it's election time. Does somebody do you want to be accused of
Right.
or
Cutting,
are you comfortable enough to explain, well, this is what it's for. This makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's some tough choices to be made.
It's going to be an interesting budget season.
Very much.
Okay. I'm personally a little confused about the Christmas tree items, not what they mean. And by the way, folks, it sounds when they say Christmas tree items like, it's just like, oh, here's 50 million to do what you want, go to restaurants or, but there's a lot of them are very solid, probably most of them, solid programs for good purposes. But I guess they're not all allocated according to, need and, so what's happening with them in the budget? There's no money in them for the budget. And do you think with the elections coming up, there's going to be a push to get them in somehow, like maybe by raiding the surplus or somehow? Maybe it's changed in recent years, but don't the Christmas tree items usually get added on after, like in June, or do they put money aside for that beforehand?
This is all part of the budget process. These are things that'll get discussed now. I'll give you an example, and that's Big Brothers Big Sisters, right? A well-branded social organization, does great work. They've been in the governor's budget, practically his entire 8 years. This year, nothing, right? They were getting $1 million. This year, nothing, okay? They've obviously got a real base of support, legislators who have supported that appropriation over the years. They're obviously reaching out to people now to get that money back in. How much of those, so we call them Christmas tree items, and we make it sound like it was frivolous.
Right.
But I would say most of them are legitimate in terms of what they're trying to achieve. A lot in the charitable social services area. People do like to talk about the money that was going to go to the French Museum in Jersey City.
I personally would have liked that, but
people have used that as kind of what is wrong with the process.
Yeah.
But I would say 80 to 90% of what gets proposed are very legitimate. They're like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Clubs, Junior Achievement, things like that, that need a little extra boost. But again, the governor clever this year, $1.2 billion in tax increases, and at least that amount cut in terms of quote, we'll call them Christmas tree items.
Okay, so is that what he's referring to when he says that he's cutting X amount in discretionary funding? Okay, interesting. So we've got the gubernatorial primary and a lot of candidates running on both sides, as you were just alluding to. It's going to be very hard for me to vote this year anyway, so there's a lot of candidates running on both sides. What are the pundits saying? I guess primarily, with the governor's races. Like, it's, as far as I can tell, it's like really up in the air. But what are you guys hearing?
I think up in the air is a good way to describe it. I think given some of the political discussion, the lack of a line that Dale talked about, this is unpredictable. Unpredictable with how we respond as a state to what's going on in Washington, D.C., and unpredictable with the lack of that party alignment that we've had in the past. I guess on the optimistic side, you hear a lot of people running for governor talking about affordability, talking about plans to grow the economy, talking about concerns about our tax climate on the Republican Democratic side. So I think there's reason to believe we will have a governor from either side of the aisle that focuses a little more on job creation, affordability, taxes than what we've been seeing with the high tax environment that we have. So I tend to be an optimist, and maybe that's not warranted here, but I think there's some good candidates on both sides that I feel good about. But there's also candidates that are running that are talking about businesses aren't paying their fair share. Well, we're paying the highest tax rate in the entire nation. That's not your fair share.
What is fair share? Right?
And there's candidates that are running that are talking about, hey, if the federal government does these tax cuts, we need to then increase taxes on those people. And it's like, and that's not going to work, and that's not practical.
Before,
and that hurts our competitiveness. And so there's things to be optimistic about. There's things to worry about. But there is this historic race where there's 9, 10, 11 legitimate candidates that all have a path to become the next governor.
Right, right. What are you hearing?
I mean, this environment, quite frankly, is somewhat unique in terms of competitive races, right? I mean, we haven't seen this when you think the last bunch of governor's races. It's been usually one or two people in a primary.
Yes.
So this is the most crowded primary in both sides that we've seen in some time, right? When I made my comment at the front end of the show, Jeff, about God bless the next governor, I was referring to both parties, right? I mean, whoever the next governor will be, Democrat or Republican, the budget is going to be a very, very serious problem.
Right.
I would just say on the Democratic side, you have 6 people running, and it's interesting. I've talked to a lot of people about it. Nobody's prepared to say this person is a front runner, although I've heard people talk more about Mikey Sherrill in that regard.
Right.
But I would say when you really look at the lanes that they're trying to excel in, whether it's the progressive lane, the more center left lane, each of them have an argument to be able to make a certain lane work for them.
Right.
Meaning that one of them could actually win with just 30% of the vote.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So at this point, it's too early to say to count anybody out, but it's possible somebody could win with 35% of the vote, which would be
yes.
And we don't have a runoff system, so that person who gets the most wins.
Yes. I mean, it's and this happens in other countries, where they don't have a 2-party system. You could have 2 progressive candidates who get 35% each, and I'm sorry, I can't add 30% each, and split the vote. So most of the electorate has voted progressive, yet the guy or the woman with 40% wins. It's going to be, I agree, very interesting.
Yes.
So we have a political question, I guess it is a political question from our audience. The full assembly is up for re-election. What impact will this budget have on those races? And I know you have addressed some of this already, but Dale, you're our political guru.
I would just say I think we touched on it a little bit. One thing we didn't say, and I appreciate the question. We have the governor's race, and then we have the assembly races. Right, we don't have Senate races this year. Right. So, and the assembly is being very cautious. I mean, the speaker's rebate program was designed, I think, from a timing standpoint, to maybe be helpful to his members, right? That's supposed to kick in, but they're going to look. You look at even at Democrats that live in South Jersey. Some of these tax increase proposals aren't going to work down there. They might work in North Jersey in a primary in Newark, but they're not going to work in a primary down in Gloucester and Salem counties.
Right.
So, the speaker, he's probably counting votes already on what things that he feels can get done in response to the governor, all recognizing that what the governor's willing to put back in his budget, these Christmas tree items, may be dictated by the level of the number of tax increases that the legislature is willing to go along with.
Right. Let me ask both of you, do you think, there's this $6.3 billion surplus. Do you think they might raid that for any of these problems that you're talking about? And I'm not talking about the federal problems that may come up later, but wouldn't it be convenient to just say, all right, we won't do this $500 million of tax, whatever it is, whichever one, for example, that might hit the most people, and we'll just take that out of the budget surplus. Didn't they do that last year?
I think you raise a very good point, Jeff. I think that is more than likely. We're just talking about elections and this year's races. Budget ultimately gets down to, it's the thing the state does the most. It impacts your pocketbook, your wallet. And I think that surplus, does the average voter care about, I'm going to vote for you or not vote for you because the surplus is $6 billion or $5 billion?
Right.
I don't think people think about that. But I'm going to not vote for you because my energy bills and outside the budget, but that's a pocketbook wallet issue. Energy costs are soaring, and they might get angry and they might vote against whoever they think might be responsible for that. They might see that when they go to play around the golf or take their family for mini golf and that's more expensive, I'm going to vote against the guy that I think is responsible for that. or I'm going to vote for the guy that stood up and said how this is bad policy and voted against it. But those pocketbook issues do come into play. And so if you had, say, I'm going to keep that $6 billion surplus, or I'm going to lower that to 5, but all these taxes, which actually might come up in November or June, depending on the election that you're more worried about, I'm going to take that off the table and I'm just going to raid that surplus. Is that really a wallet pocketbook issue now? Maybe it is down the road if we don't have a healthy surplus, but now I think politically that's an easy thing to do. When this is an election year budgets often do have less taxes, more Christmas trees we're talking about to kind of spread that positivity around. I think you could wind up seeing some of it.
Yeah, I personally, that's my bet. What do you think?
My closing comment would be, it would not surprise me that after the June 10th primary, when we have a Republican and a Democratic nominee, that some significant parts of the budget could be changed based on who the two nominees are.
I didn't even think about that. Right, that makes sense. Yeah. Chris, can you tell us about the business community's response to this budget? And I know that, I think generally speaking, they're not too happy, and NJBIA's position is pretty much the mainstream business community's response, the chambers of commerce and so on. What can individual business owners and employees too, I guess, what can they do to politically fight what they don't like in the budget?
Well, so right now we're in that period, March and April, we kind of almost go on a roadshow around the state, and BIA will be meeting with every member of the budget committee and leadership in the legislature and the administration. We will also be testifying to the Assembly and Senate at their public testimonies, public hearings, to make sure that they're hearing and the press is picking up what the business community thinks about the budget. We will then be lobbying in the halls of the State House on all of those issues. And so, number one, BIA, as you said, we're closely aligned with generally what the CPA Society and BIA and the business community is all seeing. But a lot of the best ideas that I see in Trenton come from the great minds of your members and the accountants around the state. And so I encourage you, reach out to you, Jeff, reach out to BIA, a lot of them are members of ours, and let us know if you're seeing things in the budget that are more important to you, tax cuts that might be more helpful to you, tax increases that will be more onerous to you. Let us know so that we can then prioritize, because ultimately BIA is certainly not going to get everything we're asking for in the budget. Maybe we'll get a couple things we're asking for. Just like last year with the CBT increase, we prioritized a few things that we tried to make that a little bit better, and we got one thing to make it better that is temporary. But again, we heard from our experts. We heard from the guys that know tax better than anybody else, those CPAs and the folks working at corporations doing tax for them. And so anything we can hear from the people out there that are listening right now makes us better at our job. So please reach out. But BIA will be doing this roadshow, going on some Zoom, some traveling all over the state, but just to make sure everyone knows where business is. And that is to express that disappointment, to express that, hey, these cuts will hurt the economy, these tax increases will hurt the economy, but please leave alone these good things that the budget has. We don't want to see them go away.
So what about, though, on a more, grassroots level? Now, you're talking about what the business organizations are doing, and we're helping too. But I mean, just the mom and pop store owner, and what can they do? I mean, to try and influence this, other than pay their dues.
No, I would encourage you, because sometimes it's funny, having worked in the legislature, you would hear that, I'm getting an avalanche of calls if like 4 people called.
Yes.
And so if people reach out to their assembly members, their senators, and they make sure that, hey, you know what, if you tax digital services, that's going to make the cybersecurity platform that I need, or the member outreach platform that I use, more expensive, and it's going to hurt my company, or it's going to hurt my small bit, whatever it might be. If you tax, if you're a shore company and you provide amusement services and entertainment options, and you're going to tax much of those things in this budget with the participatory sports expansion of the sales tax, like, tell people that this is how much it would hurt. And by the way, that same business that's providing all this stuff that's in Ocean City, Maryland, or Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, they don't have this tax, and therefore I'm at a competitive advantage for that. So if our legislators hear that from actually the real business people, and again, they love you, Jeff, they love you, Dale, they love, or maybe they love me, I don't know, but they appreciate us in the halls of the State House. But if there's actually a real constituent calling, it makes all the difference in the world. So I would encourage people to reach out to their legislators if they can and express what bothers you.
Right. Dale, what are your thoughts on how, business people can flex their political muscle, so to speak?
I think Chris covered it, Jeff. I mean, it's rare that people would write a letter. It's rare that people pick up a phone call. I've been involved in so many different grassroots advocacy campaigns. The simple phone call to a legislative office from a real person
is huge.
Is enormous. I mean, and even if you got 5, 4, it has an impact.
Yes.
I'm telling you, it's, business, labor's unions seem to do it well.
Yes.
Business, I get it. You're trying to run a business, whatever, but it's so basic, it can have a tremendous impact.
Right. And it's interesting what you both said about 5, 6 calls making a difference, because way back in the beginning when I first started here, and we still do a lot of grassroots stuff, was we have the members, we know how important the calls are. And I'd say we had 15 people call, and they'd be like, what? And I'd be like, you don't understand. That's an avalanche. So, so in other words, each individual call really, or letter or whatever, I think calls are the best. Emails, they've made that pretty easy.
As long as an email's in your own words.
Yes. Can't be a
I hate
can.
to give.
Yeah. No, I know. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they just throw all those out. So we have several questions from our audience that were submitted asking about eliminating fraud, waste, and abuse, and cutting red tape. Is there any such movement on that front in New Jersey?
I guess the optimistic answer is I'm hearing from gubernatorial candidates on both sides of the aisle that there's an interest there. Again, going back to disappointingly, there was a government efficiency and regulatory review, the GEAR committee. It was a bill that was bipartisan. It was sponsored by Assemblywoman Pinkin in the Assembly, who's since gone on to a Middlesex County position, Democrat, and Senator Oroho in the Senate. It had the support of Senate President Sweeney. I thought it made all the sense in the world. BIA was happy to see it, and basically just looking at where we can be more efficient, where we can cut the red tape. And it was actually written in a bipartisan way, to make it tied to Governor Murphy's own efforts at innovation and efficiencies. And yet the veto statement, Governor Murphy vetoed this, even though it passed with unanimously in the Senate and only 1 no vote in the Assembly. But Governor vetoed it, saying, it's Christie's Red Tape Review Commission. We got to move away from that. And it's frustrating to see, because I think rooting out red tape should not be a partisan issue. And you could protect workers and protect the environment and get rid of unnecessary red tape at the same time. And that was always our position. I have some faith that there's some legislators on both sides looking at these issues, regulatory reform issues, and actually it's kind of timely right now. We've been seeing just yesterday in a Senate committee and later this week in an Assembly committee, we see some movement on some regulatory reform initiatives. And so we see both houses, Republicans, Democrats. I hope we can get back to where GEAR is a good thing. I do worry in this hyper political world that we're in, some of the negativity that surrounded some of President Trump's and Elon Musk's efforts that might sour the Democrats and the majority from doing any of this, even if they were on board with it before the Doge effort that we've been seeing in the news.
Yeah, you don't want to say Doge, fraud, waste, any of that around the Democrats, because they, like you said, goes right back to their fears of Doge, Trump. But like you said, those are good concepts that have been around, and we supported it. The bill you were talking about also, and it was really disappointing that happened. What do you think?
I would just say it's unfortunate you need a bill to do that.
That's an excellent point.
No, every governor, Democrat or Republican, every governor, anybody that sits in that chair should want to come in and take a look at what's going on all the agencies to make sure things are done right. And a responsible governor then will share that with the legislature to see if there needs to be changes. But I just think I don't want to talk about what Trump is doing right or wrong is right, but he's at least doing what I think any governor or president should do. Take a look. How you
Right.
do that is
It's a whole different.
a whole different story, but every governor should do that. You shouldn't
Yeah.
need a legislature.
No, you're right.
mandate to do that.
You're right. I guess that's partly why New Jersey is like what, the most regulated state, except for maybe California. So we have another question. Maryland is considering imposing a sales tax on professional services. What's the likelihood, you think, here in New Jersey that type of sales tax would be considered?
Not this time around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't expect it this time around. I mean, the digital services that Dale brought up is definitely a worry in the budget that we need to get more clarification on. But I think the good and bad, and getting back to the politics of New Jersey, is New Jersey's always been a bluer state than others, but we're not as progressive as other blue states.
Right.
Maryland, you see some, having worked in some national tax conferences and spoken and talking to some businesses that are worrying about state tax issues all over the country, you see some bad ideas come out of Maryland. You see some
Right.
bad ideas come out of certain states that we're not used to going to. New Jersey, if they want to find new revenue, they just increase the rate. And that's bad, and we're uncompetitive because of it. But you don't see some of the more complicated in the weeds tax proposals coming
Right.
from our legislature. And I appreciate that. And I think we're lucky to have budget chairmen, whether it's Senator Sarlo and Assemblywoman Pinter-Marin, that I think are not looking to be anti-business,
Right, yes.
and are trying to promote development, stimulate the economy, and they don't want to come up with the newest progressive idea
Right.
in tax policy. And I think they're good budget chairmen.
Yeah,
because of
no, I totally
And I
agree.
would point out that both the Speaker and the Senate President are practicing attorneys.
Yeah.
that is an important point.
Yeah, I mean, I would think in New Jersey, professional sales tax would lead to a revolt. You know, it would impact so many people. But there are states that have done it. You know,
And I think I did just hear Maryland came to some resolution. They were looking at a business to business tax, and they're not going there. They
Right.
decided not to do that, and not tax soda. Those are the two things that I saw this morning.
Right.
I saw Governor Moore on Facebook, and I follow him because him and I both went to the same college.
Really?
And so I saw that, and also because you want to see some of the bad ideas they're doing, and hope they're not coming here. But yeah, he announced that they're not going in those two directions. And looking at tax policy, one of the big overarching points, you don't want to tax inputs. You want to tax outcomes, and you don't want to start that pyramiding that happens if you start taxing like things before their final products. And so anytime you're getting into the services, digital services, a lot of the
Right.
things that the governor wants to extend sales tax to, I think are bad tax policy and go
Yeah.
against some of those principles.
And you don't know that those taxes are happening.
I hope they're not.
Right. No. I mean, you don't, some of these, like when they tax things on a wholesale level and whatever, you know, if I'm thinking this through, you'll notice the tax you'll notice the increased price, but you may not know where it came
Yeah.
from. Whereas when it's a sales tax or a fee, you know who to blame.
Yep.
So we are approaching the end of our broadcast. Let me ask you each for your closing thoughts about the budget and anything we may not have covered today. Chris, let's start with you. Any final thoughts?
Oh, thank you, Jeff. Always a pleasure to talk to you and the Society of CPAs and your members. I think we're starting this process, certainly not at the end, and we've got a long way to go. And layering all the political machinations on top of this budget process will make it a unique one. Governor Murphy's last one also, and so other things that he wants to make sure he's accomplishing. And talked about the fiscal responsibility stuff. I would imagine he wants to make sure some of that is part of the legacy that he leaves. And hopefully the legislature doesn't mess with some of the things that are fiscally responsible in the budget, but can roll back some of those tax increases that will hurt our competitiveness, and maybe find some ways to restore, whether it's higher ed, whether it's manufacturing, some of those anti-business tax cuts. And I'm hopeful. I tend to be optimistic, and I often get in trouble for being too optimistic, but I'm hopeful that the legislature can make this budget a little better when we get to June.
Right. You know, it's interesting, as I said up front, and I think I read somewhere you said the same thing about this being just another budget, more of last year, another typical budget, more of last year. Yet I have a feeling there's going to be a whole, I want to say circus. There's going to be a lot of fireworks around it, I think, politically, with the Trump aspect. And anyway, Dale.
No, that's where I was going to go, Jeff. I was going to say I'm going to finish where I started. and just say that 2025 is going to be a year that none of us have ever experienced.
Right. Right.
I wish I could just be a political scientist and kind of stand on the sideline, because it's a political scientist's dream.
Yes.
With Trump, the gubernatorial races, and the absence of the county line that I tried to describe to your viewers, it's, as I sit here today, it's very difficult to predict. To Chris's optimism, I hope that, you know, politics always plays a part in all of this, but I hope it doesn't dominate, right? Because that's not good.
Right.
To do a budget that's just so political that we come to regret it, because our fiscal future isn't in good shape, and too much politics would really put us in a bad way.
Yes, I totally agree. And maybe 2 years from now, we can look back on this. Somebody will do an academic paper on it, and it'll be interesting.
You can do another show on it.
Yeah, well, yes, there you go. Well, Chris and Dale, as always, I've learned a lot from you, and I'm sure our members have too. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I really do look forward to doing this again in a year from now. This is one of my favorite episodes. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Jeff.